Today we're going to talk about, some of the sales strategies specific to Nextgen, and particularly what I like to focus on in the sales process. And I'm in an interesting scenario where I get to talk to a lot of benefit consultants all the time, see the differences in their sales process. And we have an eclectic mix here where you've been in the business for over 25 years, bought, sold businesses. Daniel, you've been in sales outside of the insurance industry. And so looking forward to getting some outside perspectives and also how you've transitioned that to inside of this industry. I feel like so often in our space, we focus on a race to the bottom of the spreadsheet, talking about, what's the rate? But at the end of the day, if you're focused on rate, you live and you die by the rate. How do you guys, and we'll start with you, Mark, how do you shift the conversation from the very first interaction with the employer, whether it's a prospecting call, interaction at a community event, to value-based versus a race to the bottom on the spreadsheet?
So it's really an opportunity, to get it away from the typical conversation. And so I like to interact and start with the C-suite. And in the C-suite, one of the first things I do is say, we're going to have an initial meeting, and that's going to be a 30-minute meeting. And the purpose of that is to see if there is a mutual business relationship that we should spend more time to forge. And when I get on the call with them, it's typically a Zoom, I'll even tell them I'm going to set a timer for 25 minutes in. And when that timer goes off, you and I are going to decide if we're ready for another meeting.
How have you seen, maybe when did you start implementing that tactic? Was it a while ago? And how have you seen that improve your sales cycle?
It's been ever since I started the mastermind, so it's about 2.5 years, 3 years. And so it has changed. So I'm able to get directly to the C-suite. And as I position Nextgen and use some of the language that I learned from the masterminds and talking with the C-suite, we're able to essentially get that audience and maintain that audience without getting pushed down to HR.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the most important things is getting to that no faster. If it's going to be a no, let's get to that no in the first meeting so we don't have 4, 5, 6 meetings dragging you down the path. And then
I'm glad you brought that up, because the way I open my 30-minute Zoom session is we're here to see if it's a mutual business relationship. And obviously I want a yes, but I'm actually good with a no. What I don't want is a maybe. So let's get to the facts, be brutally honest, and I'm going to be that way with you, and we'll decide 25 minutes in if we should go to the next step.
What's your take on that, Daniel?
I think it's so interesting. The C-suite thing I 100% agree with. We spend so much time on the C-suite subject being in the mastermind group that, that's where the decision needs to be made. That's where the change happens. If you're going to roll something downhill, those people have to be involved. And I think that there's such an interesting take on when you go meet with a CEO or a CFO, they have to leave that 30-minute interaction with trusting you. Whether it's a yes or a no, it doesn't really matter.
Totally agree.
They have to leave that meeting trusting you. And, so I come from a software background. I said that. It's something that he's mentioned. In that space, there's a plethora of data when it comes to your buyer. One of the largest data analytics companies did a survey, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, of 3,000 enterprise buyers. CEOs, CFOs, Fortune 500 companies, and one of the questions is when you meet with a salesperson, a vendor, a contractor, somebody that's selling you something, what percentage of the time does that salesperson bring you value? And the response was that 90% of the time, the salesperson brought zero value to them. And so if you think about it, when you start thinking about trust, it's different in the C-suite. It's not trust like I trust my brother. It's not loyalty-based trust. It's value-based trust. You've created a scenario where they look at you as you're valuable for me to spend time with, based on the people you have access to, the knowledge you have access to, the processes that you put in place, whatever that might be. So I couldn't agree more with kind of the direction that you shared.
What are some of the leading questions that you guys use to build that trust in usually you have a very short window of time, and it's often that first impression they talk about. Usually somebody's got to read on you in the first 8 seconds that the interaction has taken place. So, beyond that 8 seconds, what kind of questions or what value are you leading with to build and develop that trust?
So I think, I don't know if there's necessarily a script on those questions. I don't think it works that clean. It'd be great if that was the case. But I think probably the biggest thing that I've been able to do to create trust in that scenario is talk to them about other CEOs. Everybody in this room knows a CEO to some extent. It might be a CEO that's in this room that owns a business.
I'm a CEO.
Right, exactly. And so everybody knows one. And so if you went and talked to them and said, hey, can you just give me your opinion on these 3 subjects? Well, the thing I'm going to go tell the CEO I'm meeting for from a business perspective is, hey, I met with the CEO the other day. These are the 3 things that he told me on X subject. Do you agree with that? Do you want to add to it? You want to take away from that stuff? And so I think, that does a lot of things. It shows that CEOs are meeting with me. It shows that I've been in this room before. It shows that I'm listening to whoever it is I'm talking to on their take of X subject. And so when we think about healthcare, it's odd to a CEO to hear that you're meeting with other CEOs about healthcare because nobody's meeting with him about healthcare or her about healthcare. So I think that's kind of the angle that I take, more than I want to make sure I get these pieces to be answered. If I'm going to try to do it in a short window at least. I got 2 minutes to check a box, that's the box I'm trying to check.
Being a CEO and having been a CEO, do you take a different approach there?
The first question I ask after I go through the meeting expectations is, can you tell me why you took this meeting? Because obviously something's broken if he's talking to you, or maybe they have hopes for something better, maybe something they saw. Usually by then there's been some pre-approach, and also always by then, for every meeting I do, I've done a good amount of research on their company, like mission, vision, values. So I even had recently a CFO that was, as we were having that initial dialogue, and I made a comment that even like as you guys say in your values, that you want to get out of the box and you want to think differently. That's why we're here, right?
Just to pivot the conversation a little bit, I mean, ideally we always want to be working with the decision maker, but sometimes, especially in those initial meetings and in the day of Zoom, not every decision maker or people who are impacting the decision are on those first meetings. How do you guys navigate, especially in the small group space, I feel like, where a lot of people in the companies are wearing multiple hats or blurred lines in terms of the hats that they're wearing? How do you navigate, getting from the CEO down to maybe getting the buy-in from the HR director? Because oftentimes I feel like it's the HR director that you ultimately need to win over, that you may not have that initial interaction with, because they may be pushing back in terms of, we don't want to upset the members, we don't want to rock the status quo. And so even if you have the buy-in of the CEO from a financial standpoint, or the CFO from a financial standpoint, how do you navigate inside the C-suite to encompass all of those elements?
So whenever I am part of my process, let's say we get through that 30 minutes and we're moving on to the next level, is to actually bring in the HR person, but I tell the C-suite, usually I'm working with the CEO, sometimes the CFO, but I'll address, at some point we need to loop in HR, tell me about your HR person. And usually they're already kind of thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to get that. we're going to have to go down that path. And so it actually breaks the ice. I'm going to say, tell me about what we've got to do to get them on board. What type of thinking are they? What's their background? And so it's almost a partnership on how are we going to tee that up with them.
Daniel, I know you have kind of a profiling system that you use based on the decision maker personality type. Is that a lot of what you use to navigate those conversations, or how do you bounce around the C-suite?
Yeah, I think that the piece that's in common for the C-suite and the HR person is that what we're trying to do is help the people that work there. The financial side of it is a bonus. The fact that there's so much fat in the current healthcare plans that exist, that's what makes us drive the financial conversation at the C-suite. Like, there's a piece of it where if, like, there's a group that I was working with where it was $500 less per month for their employee only than what they have today. Put them into these strategies, 100-person group, put them into these strategies versus a Blue Cross plan, there was $500 difference in how much a single employee would pay each month. So you don't have a choice but to talk about the financial aspect. But at the end of the day, you're trying to get the employees better care, better access to care, better quality care, and you're trying to educate and communicate on that. So it's not a bad thing to me to have to talk to HR. It's just the lens that I ideally have created by the time I get there is I want to introduce you to somebody we're looking at working with who is highly focused on our people. Like, that's the message I want to come from C-suite down to HR, is like he's focused on the people that are here more than I want him or her pushing down this financial message.
I totally agree with that. It's a different positioning point to HR. Another kind of circle of that same thing about when you're getting pushed around the politics of a company, that's a little, I guess, a tip, is if you try to make a meeting with the owner or C-suite and they push you down to HR first, when you do after you do that meeting with HR, always send the C-suite a recap of the meeting and keep them informed of the progress. Because picture this, if the meeting was recent, you're going to say, hey, you referred me to Sally, here's what we talked about, and here's kind of the recap, and the next steps are we're going to talk in 30 days. And then in 30 days, when they go silent on you for whatever reason, it gives you a reason to, hey, I know, Mr. CEO, I told you that I was going to report back in 30 days, but I hadn't been able to get in touch with Sally, but I'm trying. I'll keep you posted. And imagine how that next one goes 60 days out, 90 days out, still hadn't heard.
Yeah, I think it's interesting on that point. In the last session we just did, I said something about being off the shelf when it comes to level funding. In my opinion, your sales process has to be off the shelf too. And what I mean by that is, like, we do the exact same thing. We call it a control email. So after we have a meeting, we send a control email to the people that are involved in the decision, assuming they've all been met, that's basically three main categories. Here's what we talked about, here's why we talked about it, and here's the decision-making timeline or decision-making process that all have dates on them. So we're going to meet January 29th. We might have another one below it that says February. We might have another one that says March. We're going to say the decision comes from this time. And tied to that timeline are things that maybe I have to do. So my name might be on the January 10th date. Or the employer, maybe they need to give me information. They've got to get that to me by the end of the month. Whatever that might be, sending those kinds of emails and having some sort of plan and process that you replicate over and over and over again is, I think, what makes it easier on us to kind of control the actual sales cycle versus it just happening to you.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a sales process, but one of the things that I've learned a lot from you, Daniel, is really being able to kind of profile people. Would you mind just walking us through I know you have an acronym for it, and I can never remember it.
Yeah, so it's funny, I in full transparency, I started doing healthcare in April of last year. Actually, Mike Ramone is somewhere. I saw him. He's over there. When I met Mike Ramone, it was at Nelson's boot camp in March of last year. But I can nerd out on sales stuff. I really can. I've just spent a ton of time there, and from a perspective of, I want to be able to sit down with somebody and truly communicate with them and have them communicate with me. If I can fix a need, awesome. But it's more important that real stuff happens. Like, one of the things that I'm focused on is that I talked a little bit about it earlier in referencing other CEOs, but there's a difference between expertise based on engagement and expertise based on industry knowledge or institutional knowledge. What I mean by that is that when I go sit down with a CEO, they have a level of institutional knowledge that I cannot get to. At their business, I can never know it as well as they do. I can't go deep enough or I'm gonna drown, like I can't keep up. Well, at the same time, if I talk to 40 CEOs in the last 6 months, they can't keep up with me going this way. From a breadth perspective, I know more about what that CEO thinks or what CEOs in general think on these different subjects. Whether they agree or disagree, my bank of information is bigger. And so as I look through those lenses and I think about the value I was talking about, the trust that I was talking about, I start trying to create a profile of the type of person that I'm talking to in the middle of the conversation on the fly. And there's an acronym that's called PEAK, P-E-A-K. Or if you've ever heard of DISC profiling, it's very similar to that. P stands for professional, E stands for emotional, A stands for analytical, K stands for kind. Well, you can like Google a normal CEO is going to be in this kind of category. A normal CFO is going to be in this kind of category. What are kind of the triggers? If you listen to what they say, they give you an idea on how they think. You can kind of start piecing people into one of those categories. And I think that the more you do that, the better chance you have to get them to really talk to you about what's going on at the institutional level that you need to know in order to apply it to all the breadth you have from the other conversations that you've been in.
A little tip that will work with that same mindset is if you do a search on how to follow hashtags on LinkedIn, you actually can find the most popular hashtags, but you can find the most popular hashtags by role, as in what hashtags are CEOs following, what hashtags are CFOs following. And so then I would encourage you to subscribe to that stuff, and because then you're going to see what they see.
That's a great tip.
Gets in their mindset.
Yeah, it's a great tip.
Well, and I think the importance of that, Daniel, or the next level of that is once you've profiled that person into understanding how they think and ultimately what they're concerned about, because whether it's death by PowerPoint or death by a million vendors stacked within the health plan or features that you can talk about within the health plan, at the end of the day, those 3 to 5 people that may be on the meeting with you, CEO, CFO, HR director, they're probably only concerned about 3 to 5 things. And if you can't extract those things out into the preliminary questions that you've asked so that you can ensure that you've addressed them and addressed their concerns, I can't tell you the number of times that I've been on meetings with consultants and the potential client, and they've already been sold on the broad concept of this next generation type health plan, but they have these 3 to 5 concerns each that they want to make sure they get addressed before they take the next step. And if you're just running them through a stock PowerPoint of here's the health plan, here's my value add, sure, you may be checking all your boxes, but you're not checking theirs. How do you navigate that?
He who does the most talking loses. As in, you want to be asking questions and letting them do the talking, and you've got to be able to identify. And here's just a little practice for yourself: is when you get off of any call or presentation, you walk out, think about, do I really know what their concerns are?
Yeah, I agree.
If you can't specifically identify them, that's a fail. So you've got to learn to practice to get them out. It's not about telling them how shiny your widget is.
Yeah, I'll give you a tip on that same piece. So most salespeople don't want to ask their potential buyer what they're good at. You don't want to know that. You want to know what they're bad at so you can fix something, sell something. Well, one of my most favorite questions, to pretty much regardless of their title, is what do you think your strengths are? What are the strengths of your business? What are the strengths of the health plan you have today?
That's a great one.
And it's because it's so easy to go, well, all right, what's on the other side of that coin? What do you think the weaknesses are? And if they'll answer the strengths and they know them, it's hard for somebody to sit there and go, I don't have any weaknesses. And it kind of puts them in a scenario where you can get straight to, this is what I'm concerned about, and then it's easier to come back to that stuff later on in those meetings where you know, okay, are they really talking to me about the same thing they were concerned about at the beginning? Is that on that list of 3 to 5? Did I not overcome that? Is it still something that's something I need to address, so on and so forth?
Mark, one of the questions you wanted to address was what size groups have you found to be most receptive to these next-gen type strategies?
It's been all size groups. So in the last 24 months, I've even had an appointment setting company setting appointments for me, and I've got groups that are in the works from 3,500 down to, I guess, 50. But I think it works for all size groups. I think you have to tailor the message a little bit depending on who you talk to. So in a 3,500 life group, you're likely not going to be talking to the CEO, even though we marketed to the CEO and he pushed us down to the VP of HR. But something you got to know, a VP of HR on a publicly traded company is an executive, oftentimes has a seat at the table of being the top 5 in the company, and usually he's making about $350,000, $400,000 a year. So I mean, they're an executive.
What would you say to those folks in the audience that maybe they've been living in the 20 to 100 space that want to swim upstream into the 100 to 500 space in terms of how you have to play the game differently?
Well, I would first say join the masterminds, because it'll take you 10 years to learn what you'll learn from those guys in 6 months to a year. But you need the regular interaction with those guys and the stuff they're doing in the talk track. And also the mastermind talk track will help you even in those bigger groups, because you can position yourself as being one of the next-gen mastermind partner firms.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. So I said a little bit about this earlier. I joined the mastermind group in April of last year. I had 0 healthcare clients when I joined. Part of my story, just so you guys don't think I just popped out of nowhere, is my dad did voluntary benefits for a really long time. The firm that I bought into, all VB, no healthcare business at all. I went to Ascend last year. I went in January. I went to boot camp in March, joined the mastermind group in April. I closed my first client in August. I closed 5 groups total in the first, I don't know, what is that, 6 months of really probably going after it. I closed 5 groups that are all this stuff. And the access to people like Mark, just the people in the mastermind group, like I have opportunities this year that are one's 7,000 people, one's 50 people, one's 400 people, and like I don't even know what to do with those things. But if I can open that door based on people that I know, everybody that I need to get an answer from is like either a text message away, a phone call away, things like that. And having that kind of network, I mean, it's been invaluable. Like it probably took a 3-year learning curve and cut it down to 6 months just from being able to have access to people in that group.
What do you know now that you wish you would have known 6 months ago? In terms of, I mean, we have pretty intimate conversations, yeah. But there have been some obvious blind spots that you can see now that you just didn't see in the moment, and how do you look to use those going forward?
That's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one. So I lost 92% of my deals last year. I won 8%, which in the first 6 months isn't terrible, I don't think. I think that'll probably double this year. So I had a lot of failure, which is helpful. I think the thing that one of the reasons that I lost them, that I would say I had some bad losses in sales, is I didn't focus enough on the service that goes along with these plans. I focused on the outcome of the plan, and I think that matters. But when you have a lot of people that are like, I've never heard of these things, you think about trying to take somebody that's never heard of this at all, and in maybe 4 hours of conversations over 3 weeks or however long it is, you're taking them to moving to this kind of strategy and their mind believing in that. I think a lot of that is that I'm going to hold your hand through that whole thing. That's not transactional. That's not just going to happen for 4 weeks. I'm going to meet with you guys quarterly, or I'm going to meet with every one of your members individually, or whatever it might be. I think service is probably the piece that I didn't focus on enough. And a lot of that, like I met with Ed Legande 2 days ago, and he literally talked to me about service for an hour and a half. And like I didn't even realize it until we got to the end, and I was like, if you had to sum up everything you're telling me, are you saying that I need to sell on service more? And he was like, yeah. I was like, well, it's not good that it took me this long to get that, but yeah, okay, I can do this. So I think that's probably the biggest one. Focus on that.
Would you echo that message, or?
Yeah, I certainly think it's a factor. I would say, I guess my mind immediately goes to I would be reading my audience on what's important to them. And so I definitely think it's a piece that's going to come up in the sales process. It's a matter of where and when. When you're talking to the C-suite early on, I don't think that's the piece, but you're going to have to get there to get everybody on board before you're done.
Yeah. Like one of the deals that we worked together, I got a yes from the CEO, a yes from the CFO. It's a 60-person group, and I got a no from the HR director. And so I lost the group. And it was because I skipped the service piece all the way at the end of the sale.
But since we're an established agency, I think that comes a little more intuitive for us is, you know, like when we talk about once they're saying okay to the next-gen strategies and thought process, you know, our strong suit has always been communication and employee engagement. So that's like a given with us.
Yeah.
Having been in the business for 25 years, how have you seen, as you've moved more and more of your clients to the next-gen type strategies, that service side of the conversation transform?
It's always there. I'd say the biggest thing that's still always been there that continues to be important is communication and engagement, because the best solutions don't work unless the employees buy in. And at the end of the day, so a while back I got to be on we were featured on CNBC for some of the stuff we had done, and Alexander Haig said it. He quoted this when he started the show. What an employee thinks about their benefits may be more important than the benefits themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's powerful. Perception is everything.
Absolutely.
Daniel, you had an interesting question here that I'm not quite sure I even understand what it means, but what bus do executives see coming versus the one they don't see?
Yeah, so I talked to Deb. I don't know if she's in here, but I talked to Deb about this. So there's a book called The Challenger Sale that probably some of you or most of you have heard of, and it talks about reframing. Well, for a CEO or CFO, it's not a surprise to them that healthcare costs are going up. I mean, you can it's happening to you. So if you think about a bus is coming at you, if a bus is coming at you in the middle of the road, you're going to step to the side so it doesn't hit you. Well, the bus that is happening to all of us is healthcare costs are going up. The bus that somebody doesn't see, a CEO doesn't see, a CFO doesn't see, is they don't know why that's happening. And if you think about it, imagine if you buy a widget from somebody for 10 years. In the first year it's $1, and then $2, and $3, and 10 years later you're buying the exact same widget for 10x the cost. Would you go to that manufacturer and go, hey, why did this go up 10x? What, did it cost you more to make it? Did it cost you more to ship it?
Wouldn't have waited till it went up 10x before I asked.
Right, you wouldn't do that. Nobody would do that. And so a CEO or CFO right now is going, how can we keep it to where it's manageable? Not why is it happening? And so there's a bus that they don't see. When you sit down with them, they think they do see it. And the bus they don't see is on the pharmacy side, or it's on the quality side, or it's on direct contracting, or whatever the different levers you're going to pull that say you don't have to pay this much to access this doctor. And that's one of the things that's been most mind-blowing to me over the last 8 months. It's like I can go see the same doctor and pay 5 different prices for the same thing. That doesn't make any sense. And there's a piece of it where there's an entire piece of education at the CEO level, in my opinion, where you need that person to admit that they haven't asked the questions to figure out why these things are happening from a cost perspective. And if they do, you create a scenario where you're able to reframe how they think about those same problems. And I'm making it sound slow because it can be. But if they can admit that they see that problem and that they didn't ask why, and they're now able to sit there and go, okay, let's collaborate on what's the right way for me to look at this, which is what kind of leans you down that reframing direction.
Mark, how do you lead that reframing conversation? Because I feel like that's super crucial in transitioning away from being that transactional broker to a consultative, more consultative approach to helping them admit, which there's pride involved there, and perhaps 20, 30 years of negative momentum working against you, that they have to admit that, yeah, to your point, why would you wait 10 years to ask that question? How do you help become that consultative approach instead of just saying and being an order taker as a broker, where maybe the client thinks they know what's best for them, but it's obvious to you as a consultant that they're not doing what's best for them?
So I would say, generally speaking, I don't see that their pride comes into play there. I think their mindset is, it's got to be broken. I just can't figure out where it's broke. And so through how we tee up even that first 30 minutes, that's really the point of discussion, is I do ask them the questions, but I trickle some facts to them about the industry. And for that matter, the pre-approach material they would have gotten prior to that meeting got a lot of the next-gen language in it, essentially things like, did you know that same procedure can be 5 times as much from one facility to the other, or even in the same facility by the same insurance company, depending on which plan you have. And so basically I'm trickling facts to them that is more like things that, would you be surprised if? And I think that's getting a little attention, because they know it's broke, they just can't figure out where. And then that also differentiates the facts that you're laying in front of them that are different from what the other brokers have seen. And so one of the things that I asked for in those early on meetings, not in that first 30 minutes, but we could go to the next one, is I asked for data, and I can say, I'll prove to you that those things I'm telling you are true with your own data, that it's happening in your own plan.
Daniel, anything to add there?
I just think it's interesting that I love that question of, or the scenario where they know that it's broken. Because whoever it is they're working with now, are they helping them figure out where and why and how to fix that? And I mean, the answer is no, and watching somebody realize that the answer is no to that question is an interesting place to be.
Yeah, explain to me the cost control measures you guys are using right now and how they're effective. How are you measuring them?
Right.
Yeah, and usually that pride factor comes in when they have to fire their golf buddy for the last 20 years. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah.
Oh boy, I love that one. Well, I love it and hate it, because sometimes it's not overcomable. But I have what I call a shock phrase whenever they talk about, I guess reality starts setting in that my guy may not be doing that well. And so I'll say something like, well, let me just save you $500,000, and you pay him $200,000 for doing nothing. You still come out $300 to the good. Yeah. And so usually that'll kind of wake them up, like, well, I wouldn't pay him $200 for doing nothing. Well, aren't you kind of already doing that?
Yeah.
And if I save you $500, you still come out better.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you guys. I think we're at a half hour, so thank you everybody for tuning into our session, and we'll see you at the next one.